I knew her name was Siri before I knew my own. Her face was the only thing that existed in the blank space behind my eyes, a perfect image of her laughing as she handed a paper plate to a little girl. The girl's name was Zara, and she was our daughter. This knowledge was absolute, a single point of light in a universe of darkness. The alarm was a physical thing, a screeching pulse that vibrated through the thin mattress and into my bones, trying to shake that one perfect memory apart. I sat up, and the world tilted. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I was on a cot in a small white room, wearing a plain set of white scrubs that felt stiff against my skin. Red lights swept across the sterile walls in a steady, maddening rhythm. One wall was not a wall, but a sheet of thick, reinforced glass, and beyond it was a vision of hell. Smoke billowed from an overturned military truck, and soldiers were running, not with purpose, but with a frantic terror that made their movements jerky and small. I watched one of them fall and get swarmed by other figures that moved with a horrifying, unnatural speed. The scene was silent through the glass, a nightmare playing out on a screen. My body felt weak, as if it had been unused for a long time. I pushed myself to my feet, my legs shaking, and braced a hand against the cold glass. The chaos outside was escalating. A fire had started near a barricade of abandoned cars. I had no idea where I was or why this was happening. The only solid thing in my head was that backyard barbecue, the warmth of the sun on my skin, the smell of charcoal, and the sound of Siri's voice. That feeling of love was an anchor, and without it I felt I would simply drift away into the screaming void of my own mind. A single metal locker stood in the corner of the small room. My hands fumbled with the latch before it clicked open. Inside was a set of clothes and a leather wallet. I pulled the wallet out and opened it. A driver's license was tucked into a plastic sleeve. The name read Gir Sied, and the address was in San Diego, California. The picture was of a man I barely recognized, standing with his arms around Siri and Zara. It was him, it was me, from that same perfect day. The man in the picture was smiling. I touched my own face and felt thin, gaunt skin stretched over bone. I pulled on the clothes, a pair of cargo pants and a t-shirt. My movements were slow and clumsy. As I rolled down the sleeve of the shirt, I saw it on my left forearm. A scar. It was a pale, circular mark, almost geometric in its perfection, with tiny indentations that looked like teeth. It was fully healed, not ragged or angry, just a strange white pattern on my skin. I stared at it, trying to connect it to something, to anything. A flash of an image exploded in my mind, so fast and violent it made me gasp. Yellow teeth, a primate's snarling face, a scream that was my own. The image was gone as quickly as it came, leaving behind a residue of pure terror. My mind scrambled, rejecting the memory, searching for another explanation. It constructed a new story with a desperate protective speed. There must have been a struggle. I was trying to get to my family, and guards tried to stop me. They held me down. One of them must have injected me with something, the needle leaving this mark as I fought. Yes, that felt right. It felt heroic. This scar was not a wound. It was a symbol of my escape, of my determination to get back to Siri and Zara. My purpose was forged in that moment. Survive this place. Get to San Diego. Find them. Just then the alarm cut out. The sudden silence was more shocking than the noise had been. The red emergency light stopped flashing, replaced by a low, constant white light from a panel on the ceiling. The world outside the window was still burning, but my immediate world had gone quiet. I knew I had to move now. I opened the door of the decontamination chamber and stepped into a long, empty hallway. The air was cold and smelled of antiseptic. I walked past empty labs and offices with chairs knocked over and papers scattered across the floor. The signs of a panicked and failed evacuation were everywhere. I followed the emergency exit signs until I reached a heavy set of double doors at the front of the building. A metal bar was meant to secure them, but it had been bent and thrown to the side. I put my shoulder to the door and pushed. It groaned open, letting in a sliver of strange orange light. I squeezed through and found myself standing at the edge of a massive, deserted highway. The city was silent. No sirens, no engines, no voices. Just the quiet whisper of the wind blowing across lanes of abandoned cars that stretched as far as I could see in either direction. The sky above Denver was a sickly twilight color, a mix of sunset and smoke. The chaos I had seen from the window had either ended or moved on. What was left was a profound stillness, a world emptied of its people. The true scope of my isolation settled over me, a weight heavier than any fear I had felt before. I was completely and utterly alone. The price of entry was 3 days in a steel shipping container with a bucket for a toilet and a rifle pointed at the door. I didn't mind because the town on the other side of the wall looked like a miracle. They called it Haven, a fortified settlement in the middle of the Utah desert, and after weeks of walking and scavenging, it felt like the end of a long, bad road. The wall was made of old-school buses and welded scrap metal, and inside people were growing food in neat green rows. They checked me for bites and watched me for symptoms, and when the 3 days were up, I walked out into the clean street. A free man. I showed no signs of the Gray Death. I was healthy. I was safe. For the first time since I woke up in that hospital, I felt a piece of myself return. I told them I was a lab technician, which felt true enough, and they put me to work testing the well water. In the evenings, we ate together in a large hall, and I would tell them about Siri and Zara. I passed around the faded photograph from my wallet until it was soft at the edges. A woman named Clara, who had lost her own son, would hold it and smile with sad eyes. She told me she was sure my family was waiting for me. I believed her because I had to. The memory of that barbecue was the only anchor I had in a world that had become a blank, terrifying ocean. I was happy there. I slept without nightmares. I started to think maybe I could stay, maybe I could wait for the world to heal a little before I continued my journey west. The feeling lasted for 2 weeks. Then one night, the town council called me into their office in the central building. 4 of them sat behind a long wooden table, their faces hard. The town leader, a man named Marcus with a gray beard, pushed a small radio across the table. A broadcast came through an hour ago, from a woman heading this way. His voice was flat. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. A woman's voice, sharp and clear, was already speaking from the radio, recorded and replaying on a loop. To the community in Haven. You have a guest. He matches the description of the carrier known as the Wanderer. He came from Denver. I stared at the radio. The Wanderer. That was what the RFA broadcasts called Patient Zero. A ghost. A demon. The voice continued, filled with a cold anger. I tracked him here from a gas station in Colorado. A family took him in. I found them weeks later, all dead. They had a child's drawing on the wall. It showed their family next to a new friend, a man they called Jair, the nice man. My name hit me like a physical blow. I looked at the faces of the council members. Their expressions had changed from suspicion to certainty. That's a lie, I said, my voice shaking. I never stayed at a gas station. I never met a family there. The woman is on her way, Marcus said, ignoring my words. She says he's a plague, that he kills without touching. I stood up, my hands raised. Look at me. I'm not sick. I've been here for weeks. Is anyone here sick? I was desperate, pleading with them. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. It had to be a mistake, a different GA. It had to be. As the words left my mouth, a commotion started outside the office door. Someone shouted. Then a woman screamed. We all turned as the door burst open. 2 men were carrying Clara. Her body was rigid, her limbs jerking in a violent tremor. A faint gray color was visible around her eyes. Panic exploded in the room. The world became a blur of shouting and accusing eyes. Someone pointed at me. It's him. The words spread like fire. A rifle was raised. A shot cracked past my ear and shattered the window behind me. I didn't think. I ran. I shoved my way through a crowd that was no longer made of friends but had become a single, terrified monster. I scrambled up the side of a building, over a roof, and threw myself over the outer wall. I landed hard in the desert sand and kept running as the town's alarm bell began to ring behind me. I was no longer a hopeful survivor. I was the hunted. I found a working truck a few miles down the highway, siphoned gas from another wreck, and drove west into the night. The woman's voice from the radio was burned into my mind. She was hunting me. I pushed the truck hard, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds, expecting to see headlights closing in. My head began to pound, a familiar migraine that had been getting worse for weeks. I told myself it was the stress. My left hand started to tremble on the steering wheel. I blamed it on hunger and fear. It couldn't be anything else. I was a survivor. My family was waiting. That single perfect memory was my proof. It had to be enough. The truck died in the middle of the Nevada desert. The engine sputtered, coughed, and went silent. I was alone under a vast, empty sky. I walked for hours until I saw a thin radio antenna against the horizon. It was a small, abandoned RFA medical checkpoint, just a single metal building surrounded by sandbags. Inside, it was strangely preserved. A desk, a chair, and a military radio receiver. Next to the radio was a thick communications logbook. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the pages. I powered up the receiver, turning the dial until I found a weak RFA signal. A voice was reading a damage report, a cold and methodical list of dead places. Outbreak in Grand Junction, total loss. The name was familiar. I had passed through there. I pulled my worn road atlas from my backpack, the one I used to chart my course from Denver. Catastrophic event in Green River, no survivors. My finger traced the line I had drawn on the map. Green River. I had scavenged for food there. Pattern confirms. Unexplained asymptomatic transmission. My blood ran cold. With a trembling hand, I picked up a pen from the desk. I listened to the radio, my heart pounding a sick rhythm against my ribs. I made a small X on my map for every outbreak location the announcer named. Grand Junction, Green River, Richfield, Salina. Each X landed directly on the red line I had drawn for myself, my path west, my journey. I was creating my own map of death. The pen fell from my fingers. My entire world, the quest that had defined me, collapsed into a single, unbearable truth. The hunter on the radio was right. The people in Haven were right. I was the plague. I was the wanderer. The photograph of my smiling wife and daughter slipped from my other hand. It landed face down on the map, covering the state of California. I didn't pick it up. I just stared at the page, at the neat line of X's that marked my trail of destruction. The door of the checkpoint building creaked open behind me, and a woman's voice cut through the silence. "I was wondering when you'd finally figure it out." I turned from the map. She stood in the doorway, a hunting rifle held steady in her hands. She was wiry and wore old Forest Service pants, her dark hair pulled back in a severe braid. It was the woman from the radio, the hunter. I recognized the cold anger in her eyes. I did not move. There was nothing left in me to fuel fear or flight. The atlas on the desk was my confession, written in red ink and black X's. She walked forward slowly, her rifle trained on my chest. Her eyes flicked down to the map, then back to my face. The look of righteous fury she had arrived with began to soften, replaced by something colder and more complicated. She saw the truth on the page, and she saw the wreckage of that truth in my eyes. I was not the demon she had been hunting, just a man staring at his own damnation. "They want you alive," she said. "The RFA. They think you're the key to a cure." She lowered the rifle just enough that it was no longer pointed at my heart. "I followed your trail of bodies across 3 states to kill you. But maybe there's a better way." She paused, watching me for any reaction. I gave her none. "I have a contact. An RFA team is waiting for my signal in California. I can get you there. I'll drive you to San Diego, to your house. You can see for yourself what happened." Her offer was a strange and terrible thing. The one place I had been crawling towards for months was now being presented as the final proof of my guilt. "Afterward," she continued, her voice hard again, "you surrender to me. No tricks, no running. You give yourself to the RFA." I looked from her face to the photograph lying on the map. My perfect memory was a poison that had killed everyone I touched. There was only one thing left to do. I had to see the place where the lie began. I nodded. A tense and funereal alliance formed in that small building. We drove for an hour in a worn truck she had hidden nearby, the empty desert scrolling past the windows. The silence inside the cab was crushing, filled with the ghosts of everyone who had died because of me. Finally, I turned my head from the window and found the words. "Did you lose someone?" Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. She did not look at me. "A girl," she said. "She was 8, same age as your daughter in the picture." We arrived at the street from my memory late the next day. It was a San Diego suburb, quiet and overgrown with weeds pushing through cracks in the sidewalk. The house was still there, exactly as I remembered it from the photograph, but the lawn was high and brown. Sheridan pulled the truck to the curb and killed the engine. She got out and scanned the street, her hand resting on her rifle. I saw her speak into a small radio, her voice too low for me to hear. She was signaling the extraction team. She turned back to me. "Go," she told me. "Find out." I got out of the truck. I was clutching the faded photograph in my hand. Every step up the concrete path was an agony of dread. The world of my memory, the world of laughing family and backyard barbecues, was about to be burned away. I reached the front door and put my trembling hand on the knob. It was unlocked. The air inside was stale and thick with dust. Furniture was overturned, cushions were torn. The house was not preserved. It was ransacked. I walked through the living room and into the hallway. A pair of metal barbecue tongs lay dropped on the carpet, far from the kitchen. In the dining room, a child's drawing was taped to the wall. It showed our family at the barbecue, just like my memory, with the sun smiling down. I pulled it from the wall. On the back, in a child's messy scrawl, were the words, "Daddy is sleeping a lot. Mommy is crying." My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled through the house, a trespasser in the ruins of my own life. In a hall closet, stuffed deep in the back, I found my Omnigen lab coat. It was spattered with dried, dark blood. I walked to the end of the hall, to the master bedroom. The door was closed. Scrawled across the wood in red lipstick was a frantic warning. "Unaffected. Stay out." I pushed the door, but it was locked from the inside. I threw my shoulder against it once, twice, and then the wood splintered and the door flew open. The smell of death washed over me. On the bed were 2 bodies, long past decay, my wife Siri and my daughter Zara. I stood frozen in the doorway. On the nightstand next to the bed was a small tablet. My hands shook as I picked it up and pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life, showing a single video file. I played it. Siri's face filled the screen. Her skin had a sick gray tinge. Her eyes were wide with terror and grief. She was recording a message. "Jair," she whispered, her voice weak. If you ever remember, you came home from the lab. There was a primate bite. You had a fever." Tears streamed down her face. Zara got sick first. It was so fast. Her voice broke. She turned the tablet, aiming it at the room behind her. A man was shuffling aimlessly near the window, his expression vacant, his movements clumsy. It was me. I looked like a monster, an empty shell. Siri's voice came from off-screen, a choked sob. "That's not you anymore. I locked us in here. I love you. I love the man you were." The video ended. The objective truth of the recording obliterated my delusion. The barbecue was from the weekend before the accident. I had not been fleeing an apocalypse to find my family. I had been fleeing the home I destroyed. The tablet slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. I heard the sound of Sheridan's boots on the porch. I knew what I had to do. My identity was gone, my quest revealed as a monstrous lie. I had nothing left but the truth of what I was. I could hear the low rumble of tactical vehicles pulling up outside. I walked out the front door, unarmed, holding the family photograph. I faced Sheridan and the armored RFA team that stood behind her. They were faceless soldiers in full biohazard suits, their weapons raised. I did not resist. I made my first and final choice based on truth. "I'm the one you're looking for," I said, my voice flat with acceptance. The memory was a lie. I'm ready. I surrendered myself. They took me into custody, no longer Jir Sayed, husband and father, but patient zero, a biological specimen to be studied in the faint hope of a cure. My personal arc concluded with the abandonment of my selfish quest, embracing a horrifying future as my only possible path to atonement. Sheridan watched the transport vehicle leave, her quest for vengeance complete, leaving only the bitter taste of a necessary tragedy.